Let me start this out by, I told you that Jean is well, she's kind of a full-blooded Kitty Hawker, but then she's not. She was born elsewhere. So Jean, tell us about where you were born and why you weren't born in Kitty Hawk. Maybe that's the leading question. Tell us why you were born in the Panama Canal Zone.
My dad was in the Navy.
And your mother traveled
Followed him
around.
there.
Yeah. And you were born in the Panama Canal Zone.
Right, Balboa.
Uh-huh. Then you moved to San Diego, and your sister, Mary Helen,
was born.
was born there.
And then we were there for 2 years, and then we went back to Panama.
Okay.
And then from there, we came to Newbern, and Bruce was born. And then Mother and Daddy went to Connecticut, and he finished his service there, and Mary Helen and I stayed with Myrnie, Helen, Frances Tillett, but we called her Myrnie.
So, and that's when you got your feet really involved in Kitty Hawk, and that's when you started going to school down here. I believe you told me 5th grade? You started at 5th grade and you finished high school at Kitty Hawk. Great. Well, everybody has a different story, and then Minnie has one. Minnie, tell us about where you were born and growing up.
Well, I was born in Duck, and all my ancestors for many years before that. So we go, I think the family's recorded in the oldest book at the Currituck Courthouse, which Duck used to be in Currituck. And so I've been there a long time. My mother was a Scarborough from Duck. My father was originally from Columbia, but he grew up in Chesapeake. And he moved down to build as a builder here on the beach, and he met my mom, and that's where he stayed. And that's where we all stayed.
That's where you all stayed. Okay,
And then I got married and moved across the Sound, and I went from one side of the Sound to the other.
Okay.
Early travels.
Great. All right, and you grew your whole life you lived in Duck until you got married
So
and
we
moved
got
away.
married and moved across the Sound.
Okay, and she was in Duck before there was electricity and water. I mean, water by a pump.
Oh, yeah.
And before there were paved roads, so.
And don't forget the outhouse.
Okay, well, now, Stanley is not originally from Kitty Hawk either, but he'll tell you where he is from. Stanley, where were you born?
I was born in Paul Gambles Hill, which is now Duck. We moved to Caffey's Inlet, which is now Sanderland. And then when my daddy had to go back in the war on ships, we moved to Kitty Hawk, where he was originally from. And I started 1st grade in Kitty Hawk.
Very good. Now, for the benefit of you that don't know, there were life-saving stations eventually they were about every 5 to 6 miles apart. The one closest north of here was Paul Gambles Hill, and it is in what is now Southern Shores, and I'm not sure of the street name in there, but
I think it was on 13th, Bill.
13th. And so there was a station there, and a lot of the local boys were in the Life-Saving Service and later the Coast Guard, stationed here at Caffey's Inlet, at Paul Gambles Hill, and other stations. So now your family, did you move your house down to Kitty Hawk?
Our house was moved in 4 sections from Paul Gambles Hill to Kitty Hawk on a truck. And they assembled it. Some of my cousins from Duck assembled it, and we moved in the woods. No electricity, no telephones, no paved roads, and an outhouse.
Now, the cousin who disassembled and reassembled that house was Andrew Scarborough, and he was a cousin.
Uncle.
An uncle?
To her.
He was my mother's brother.
Oh, okay. See, now, all these people are related up here except me, you know.
No, I'm related to you.
Yeah, I guess I am related to you too. All right.
He just don't want to admit it.
Anyway, you grew up in Caffey's Inlet, and that was because your dad was stationed at Caffey's Inlet Station. you lived in a house up there that was rented from, who owned the house? Have you?
We owned it,
Oh, you owned the house?
yes.
Okay.
And that was right where the fitness center stands by Sanderlin Restaurant. Where the fitness center is, that's where my home stood.
Now, for benefit of some of you who are not familiar with some of the early history, a lot of the stations had little cabins or cottages located around them where people in the service brought their families to live, and Paul Gambles Hill was one of them. And there was a few around Kitty Hawk, a few in Killover Hills and elsewhere. So, and Cabot's Inlet, there's always been a house or two around Cabot's Inlet. So these homes were, the people may be from Kitty Hawk, but they lived in Cabot's Inlet. So anyway, all right, let me take a little different tack this time and ask you all, growing up, tell me someone who was a favorite person of yours. Now, if you asked me that question, I would tell you it would be Mary Best. Mary Best lived across the road from my grandparents, and when I was a little kid, I used to go across the road. She always had time for me, and we would sit in the swing on her front porch, and she taught me how to tie my shoes. And so she had a special place in my heart. Now, I'm sure that you have people that grew up like that. So, Jean, tell us someone who you think is very special to you growing up. And it doesn't have to be a relative. It could be a
I think Miss B.
B. Scarborough, a B. Beecham. I mean,
No,
Bohm.
Baum.
Baum.
She
Well,
married Mr. Jesse.
yeah, just one.
And she would always go over to the church and play the organ and have all of us sit on the front row so we could listen. She was rehearsing for the service on Sunday, and she could just really play. And we just and then we'd go over to her house and had to take piano lessons, and she'd always have some goodies after we finished our scales.
Yeah, she was a Scarborough originally, I think, and she was from, I believe, One Cheese, but maybe Avon before that.
She never married until she married Mr. Jesse.
Yeah, okay. All
Yeah,
right.
she was a Scarborough.
And she came to Kitty Hawk as a school teacher. But they're doing the church, the organ playing in the 50s and 60s. If any of you went to church in those days, she was quite an exhibitionist organ player. I mean, you could, she made a lot of gestures.
Yeah, she did, and played with her feet and everything all across.
Okay, very good. How about it, Minnie? Who would be a favorite person that you had?
I would have to say my granddad of all the people.
Okay?
He was just my favorite because he loved the boats and going fishing and hanging around the water, and that was for me. And I think I learned a lot from him. A lot
Good.
that I've took through life with me of things that he would tell me that I didn't think at the time I'd ever remember it, but as you get older, you do remember a lot of the things. I think he had more of an influence on my life than most anybody.
Great, great. Stanley, do you have anybody in particular?
Oh, yeah.
All right, I kind of thought that you would.
Several of them, but one of them sticks out more than anyone is Bonnie Beecham Perry. She helped raise my dad. My dad was orphaned at 12 years old. His parents died 6 months apart, and she helped raise my father. And she and Clifton, her son, and myself were kind of raised together. As we had a little teeny house and a lot of people. There was 8 children, so I spent a lot of time there, and she kindly nurtured me along.
Very good, and for the benefit of the audience here, Miss Bonnie Beecham,
Perry.
Perry, was married to Joe Perry, and that is Clifton Perry, the mayor's, Clifton Perry's mother. So, and I remember that she used to have a horse and cart.
Nellie.
Nellie was there, and my grandparents had a store, and she would come up in a horse and cart and bring milk to the store.
I used to help deliver it.
So, that goes back a long time. Oh. All right, all of y'all went to school at the same school, a little different grades, but the same school. So, Jean, tell us something some special school story that you can think of that you'd like to share with the group?
This is about Hope Beecham.
Oh, Hope Beecham, okay. Hope was just Stanley's brother.
Yeah. We had a long table, and everybody was sitting at the table, no desk in there. And it was a lab to work. Well, we were having to do the lab work. And we were supposed to dissect a grasshopper. And I despise grasshoppers. I just hate them. So I was sitting at the very end of the table, and Hope was at the other end of the table. And he threw the grasshopper at me. My chair went backwards, and when we got up, Ms. Hill said, "Don't hit him with the chair, don't hit him with the chair." And I like that, and Hope went out on the floor. I said, "You didn't say anything about my fist, but I did hit him with my fist."
Violence in Kitty Hawk school system, I can't believe it. Well, that's a great story. How about you, Minnie? Minnie,
Oh, gosh.
Minnie was in Duck, so she had to come by school bus from Duck to Kitty Hawk to go to school. And I remember sitting across the aisle from her in the 3rd grade. But go ahead, tell us about it.
I think one memory that I have of Kitty Hawk School, Bill came to Kitty Hawk School off and on during his school years. And his father was in the service at the time. And I remember we were in maybe the 2nd, 3rd, not more than 4th grade, and we were both in a play. And Bill had to sing a love song to me in the play. And he was embarrassed, and I was embarrassed, and I just wish I could have fell right through the floor.
Well, Minnie, I don't remember that, but I do. I must not have done a very good job of singing because you married someone else.
And Billy Gray's sister, Margie, directed the play.
One of the things about the school was that they had plays several times a year, I think. And they conscripted everybody to be in the play. And I remember one time somebody else and I were messing outside and not behaving, and we got called into the principal's office, and we had to write, "I will behave from now on," or something. But we also had to learn the chicken song. And the chicken song, what was that, Jim? Well, had to learn the chicken song because we had to be in the play and sing it. Now, for those of you who aren't well-versed on some of these songs, I can sing it for you. Probably as well as I did the love song to Minnie, but it goes, C that am the way to begin, H that am the next letter in, I that am the third, and C I see a little bird, and K that's the letter in friend, E now we're near the end, CHICKN, that am the way to spell chicken. The only thing I remember from my Kitty Hawk school days. Stanley, have you got some remembrances of those, some other remembrances of Kitty Hawk?
I have a great deal of them. Some of them I'm not going to tell.
Okay.
Good.
We had chapel service every Monday morning, and we had a retired judge as a principal, and his favorite song was the Battle Hymn Republic, and that's the only song Jean could play.
Thank you.
But she could evermore frap it out. But every Monday morning, we would listen to Jean play the Battle Hymn Republic.
March into it.
And march into it.
Oh, okay.
I'm not going to tell anymore.
No, that's enough.
That's not public knowledge.
Well, let me ask you all a question. Do any of you remember the first time you saw a movie?
I do. The Trail of the Lonesome Pine
Where'd you see that?
in the Pioneer Theater in Manio.
Okay, all right.
You went to some of the movies
Did
out
you
to
ever see
school,
any
didn't you?
movie?
That was the first one I saw.
Oh, well,
Yes, my father would take us as children. He'd load the old Chevrolet car down and take us from Duck to Manteo down the beach. And it was cold, no heaters. You had blankets and you wrapped all up. And every kid in Duck was in the car. And you were, stay over my foot, move over, you know. And boy, but it was worth it. You get to the old Pioneer Theater in Manteo.
I think the first ones that I ever saw was at Kitty Hawk School.
You're older than I am.
You want to trade places?
Gene, you came through because that's the first movie I saw was in Kitty Hawk School.
Yeah.
And I
I don't
remember,
remember what the name of it was, but
well, one of the things that they used to do, they had a movie in the school about once a month or so. I don't know how often, but it was fairly frequently. And the whole school would go into the auditorium. First grade on the front row and second and right on back. And Marvin Midget, I remember, was the projectionist. And the movie I remember was Huckleberry Finn. Was the first movie that we ever saw, that I ever saw. Now, I heard that they also had movies at Duck at the
The
bombing
Navy,
range.
yeah. We
And
used to go to
invited
that.
community people to come.
The bombing range, which the Navy bombing range was there, and they invited, on Saturday nights, the community was invited to come, and they served refreshments, and everybody could watch the movie. And they were very generous with people in the neighborhood, with sharing what they had.
Gene, do you remember going to movies up at the Army base up on the hill? I heard they had movies there, but I don't remember.
I don't remember them ever asking anybody in the community to go to them.
Well, they weren't here very long, for one thing.
Yeah.
So they were only here about 3 years, and then they were gone. Okay, well, I tell you, this is going faster than I expected. I'm about to run out of questions, but I'm going to find a few. One of the things that you used to do up at Duck was to go, you had homecoming at church. Can you tell us about that?
Well, the church was just a little small community church that was built by the community over the years. And it's not the church that's in Duck now. From what I understood, the old church was moved to Williamsburg. And they had, every year, sometimes twice a year or more often, they'd have what they call food on the grounds. And everybody cooked all kinds of goodies. And everybody turned out, and neighbors and friends and people from Kitty Hawk would come and all around, and it was just great.
And relatives from other...
Relatives
that
were,
had moved
everybody
away?
was there, and after the food, they had singspiration in the church, and that's where Gary Scarborough, Norm, and I were singing on one line, and everybody else was singing on the other, but we we were about through with our line before we realized it. But it was a great time for everybody.
And it was a community thing.
Community,
It's probably
very
one of the few
community.
community things that happened in Duck.
Right.
Tell us about, I'm going to ask that same question to Russell, but tell us about Duck that you remember, the earliest thoughts you have of Duck. Like I said, you didn't have any paved roads, didn't have
Well,
electricity.
We had no electricity, no paved roads. It was a very small community, maybe 20 families altogether, 20, 25 if that. Everyone was related, grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle, cousin, some way they were related. And no matter where you were in the neighborhood, you were free to go to anybody's house whenever you wanted, and they were eating, you ate with them if you wanted to. And if you got into something, they'd spank you just as quick as your mom and daddy would. And it was just a very, very special place to grow up, where you could go to the beach and walk all day long and never see another soul. It was just, you could walk, you never saw anybody except just in the neighborhood.
Or just who you happen to be with.
Who you happened to be with, yeah. It was very remote and very nice. But the only thing I recognize in Duck anymore is the old live oak trees that we used to play in as children, and they're a very few
Well,
other
I'm
things.
kind of getting ahead of myself here. I didn't intend to do this, but you kind of got me going here. What has happened that you miss the most about the Duck that you grew up in and knew?
I think the remoteness. I think really I do, and it's not that I'm anti-people. I'm not. I mean, it's a good area. People move in and so forth, but it's not the same place that I grew up. And to say, if you can imagine it, with no people there other than just a handful, you know how nice it would be. And we had no stores. Once in a great while, we'd have a store. Somebody would open a little pop shop, and but basically we didn't. And everybody raised their gardens. They had chickens, ducks, geese, whatever. Plenty to eat. No end to the food. It was just a great place for children to grow up. We could steal Mr. Reston's old horse and ride him all day long and get him back into pen before he got home.
One of the things you told me, tell me about the house that your dad built for the family.
Well, we lived, when my grandfather died, we moved back home. We lived a very short span. My father worked with colonial stores. They used to be called Pender stores before it was colonial stores, and he built the interior of the stores. And then when my sister started school, we came back home. So I was, other than that, maybe four years living away. And it was great, you know. And when we moved back, we moved in with Grandmama. Dad built Mom a new house. He went to East Lake. You have to remember, there was no stores here. You couldn't run down to Kellogg's or anywhere. He went to East Lake in the woods and cut all the timber. The whole house was built out of juniper. They made the cinder blocks that went on the bottom. Everything was handmade and hand done. And Mom had a great, big, beautiful white house sitting up on a hill. Electricity was in, the lights were hung, bathroom was in, and we couldn't use any of it because there was no electricity. So you could flush the john if you run out to the hand pump and got your bucket of water. And you could take a bath, but you had to tote the water. But Daddy kept saying, it'll come and we'll be ready. And it did, and we were ready. And then he went to Norfolk and got TV. Oh my gosh, we thought we had died and gone to heaven. Daddy went to Norfolk and got a TV and brought home. And that was the only first TV ever came to Duck. And everybody on Saturday nights or Friday nights, one or the other, the fights were on. And you got to remember, this is a black and a white TV. And every person in the whole Duck community came to our house on that night that the fights was on. And they would bet on white breeches or black breeches. And whichever, and then they get right down kind of serious about that betting too, you know, who was going to win that fight that night. And it was kind of interesting.
Well, it certainly sounds that way. And let me tell you, you know, what is interesting is that you've seen a whole change of lifestyle in one person's lifetime. Think about that for a minute, folks. We complain about our TV not working and so forth, but think about that this is all of this happened in your lifetime.
Yeah.
And she's not that old. Yeah.
Don't believe everything Bill says.
I'm not going to comment.
Okay, Miss Jean, why don't you tell us about your thoughts along these lines?
Well, I don't remember any church gathering, but we used to have hog killings. And they would all come, five people would come to grandmother's house. And of course, where the potato house is, that's still there. And that was always the potato house. But she used to try the lard, make the soap, clean the chitlins and pour the water. Mary Helen and I had to pour the water while she cleaned the chitlins. That was our job when we came home in the afternoon. And that was the biggest time that, the community got together for the different hog killings. And then they go from house to house to house to do them. And then, like many, we did not, the only paved road in Kitty Hawk was the main road.
I'm sorry. If my granddaughter was here, she'd tell me. She tells me all the time, Granny, don't forget that thing.
And we walked every place back and forth, and we, like many, could go to we had Shannon's store, and then we went up the road and we had Mr. Zine's. It was up the road and down the road. And the school was up the road, and Port lived up the road, but Nancy was down the road and I was down the road. And then we'd walk to the beach, and like she said, you could walk miles and miles and never see anyone except the tar when that was on the beach, and then you'd have to come home and clean your feet off so you could get in. But
Your grandmother had one of the greatest houses, I thought, and tell us about her house, what you remember about it. Because, well, for one, she cooked on an iron stove.
And she cooked on the iron stove, and the other end of the stove heated her hot water. And she had a sink to do the dishes in, but she would heat the water on the stove and we take it in. But then she also had a pantry, which nobody had. And she had a long countertop that she would roll her biscuits and everything, and a mulberry tray, you remember that one? And she would do mulberry, a dessert with mulberry and dumplings into it, that she called it. And then she had, let me see, then the next room was well, when you came in the front door, there was a living room and a bedroom, and then you went up the steps to 5 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. And then downstairs was Uncle Steve's room, then there was the living room, then the big dining room that Granddaddy made the table and made it so big. He made it in the dining room, and it could never be taken out. It was made all the way into the dining room. There was just a walkway around it. And then she had a little place out back that when she would have milk that she could put, and pies and anything to cool off out there.
You know, and she also had.
Oh, she had an outside shower too that was connected to the house.
She also had a wash house that was disconnected. It was down the road, down in the flat area. And she boiled water every Monday, I guess. I'm not sure when.
Every Monday.
She had a big pot, and she boiled water and boiled her clothes. She's the last person that I know that did that. She's also the last person I know that, I think your dad had this, that did a hog killing, but they all got together and had a hog killing right there at Miss Mary Beth. She was just a grand lady. Stanley, we don't want to leave you out here, and
That's fine.
This is the quietest she's ever been, folks. She's about to get wound up.
We lived very primitive. We lived in an old house that looked like somebody's hay barn, but we were comfortable. It was warm. We heated by wood. We cooked on wood, and we had hog killings. We had cattle, and we sold milk to the school, which was unpasteurized. And Jean's daddy did the same thing. He sold milk to the school. And she said he always would skim the cream off of it before he sold the milk. But we had big church meetings once a year at the old Primitive Baptist Church. And we cleaned out all the closets and refrigerators and everything else because there was a lot of people came by. And that was a big occasion. And then on other Sundays of the year, I would go to the Methodist church down the road. And I didn't know that we downroaders were welcome with the uproaders, but we got together anyway. And she married one of the uproaders.
Right.
But we also, I remember my mother washing outdoors with a copper boiler, boiling water, and punching it with a punch pole. And we boys, it was 8 of we children, 7 boys and a girl. And we had help with the laundry and the cow milking. And I had a muskrat line, and I could sell a muskrat for $3 to Ivy Dowdy. And if you took and broke the front legs and the back legs and the back, you could stretch them and get a little more money for it. So, but he got wise to that. But,
I'm glad.
But I do think one of the greatest privileges I've had as my childhood was growing up in Dare County. It taught me a great deal. I missed the solitude, as many did, because we didn't have many cars coming through on a dirt road. However, between our house and the cemetery was a soft patch of sand. And tourists would come in once in a while to see what was up there, and they would get stuck. And we would go help them dig out. Sometimes they give us a quarter, sometimes a dime, sometimes a little bit more. But one of my brothers was kind of inventive, and he decided if we dug the hole deeper and put more soft sand in it, Conley, we could make a little extra money.
Sounds just like you.
So
Which brother was this, Hope?
Conley.
Oh, Conley?
But we had a pry pole hid over the woods and our jacking up blocks and everything. And we'd come out of the woods and say, could we help you? And when they going up the road, turn around on the hard sand and come back through, we'd wave them real quick and they'd throw something out the window. But my daddy caught us. And my daddy was a strict person. And we never did it again.
Stanley has an association with a famous story in Kitty Hawk, the Wright brothers. His grandfather was one of the lifesavers at the Killover Hill Station. And there's a picture of him with your dad, taken in 1903. It was taken up on the slope of the hill. So there was your dad and your grandfather and a dog, I believe, in that
Bowser.
picture. Bowser? Oh, okay, all right. And so, so Stanley's, comes from great stock here in Kitty Hawk. He didn't claim to have seen the first flight, but his grandfather helped the Wright brothers move the airplane around for that attempted flight, which was unsuccessful. But he lived there on other occasions as well. So, so anyway, was your family living there at the station at that time? Do you
Yes,
know?
my grandparents were living at the station, and of course, in those years, they closed the station down 3 months during the summer,
Right.
where they could go home and cut their wood and get a garden growing, and then go back to the station for the winter. And that's where he was stationed from. My granddaddy was at Kill Devil Hill Station from 1883 until 1905. And then he moved to Cavers Inlet in 1905 and died in 1911.
Now, Stanley, you followed in your grandfather and father's footsteps. You, I guess, graduated from Kitty Hawk,
Oh, yeah,
and then you went in the Coast Guard?
Coast Guard.
Tell us about your Coast Guard
I
experience.
stayed, I gave him 20 years and 12 days.
You remember it that easily, huh?
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay.
20 years and 12 days because I was getting ready to be transferred to Boston, Massachusetts on a weather cutter going to Antarctica for 6 months. And I told him goodbye. And, I was not anxious to go to Antarctica or Boston, either one, even though it's a great city. But I was stationed primarily on the East Coast, except one tour of duty I had in southeastern Alaska. And that was a real favorite tour, but one of my other tours was on the island of Ocracoke.
Oh, okay.
I was stationed there 3 years.
Very good. Now, Gene, your port got in the Navy and made a career out of that, and you were kind of a Navy wife's wife.
Right.
So, and where did y'all serve? And
He was in the reserve, active reserve, and he stayed in Norfolk until his last 3 years, and he went to Pennsylvania, Willow Grove, Pennsylvania, and he retired from there.
okay. Minnie, you didn't have any Coast Guard time.
No, my brothers and sisters, and I had 3 brothers in the Coast Guard, and my sister's husband was in the Coast Guard.
Right.
I had a farmer.
Tell us about, tell us what you did in Duck for entertainment.
Fight with my sister.
She's not here to defend herself tonight, so we'll let her.
She's not in condition right now to fight. She broke her arm.
Oh, okay.
But no, for entertainment, wasn't much to do. I mean, it wasn't, when I was very small, there was a lot of children on Duck because my mom had brothers and sisters, and they all had 6, 7, 8 children, you know, and with us, it was, so Grandma and Granddaddy lived in the center, and the whole family lived around them. So you had lots of kids to play with, and then they moved to the Norfolk area, maybe in the late 40s or something, and where there was work. They went to work at the shipyards and the different places. So when they moved all the children away, it was like just us left. I mean, my brothers, there's 4 of us, and then the Smith children up the road, and it wasn't very many children at Duck at that time. Eddie Tate was there, and everybody moved away, and it was lonesome.
Oh, okay.
It was lonesome. You
But
missed
you-
all your buddies.
But you like to go out on the beach, walking the
Loved
beach?
going to the beach, but I loved staying in the sun. Mama wouldn't let us swim over at the beach unless an adult went, because we could go to the beach, but we weren't allowed to get in the water unless someone was there. But we could stay. My brother and I stayed in the sun most all the time.
Did you crab
Yes,
for fun or for food or for living?
mostly to aggravate Miss Lucien,
Why would you want to do that?
because she had the biggest fig tree on Duck, and she sat on the porch in a rocking chair and wouldn't allow you to have a one. And when she'd go crabbing, my brother and I'd run down the shore road and get in front of her and stir the water up and listen at her fuss at us.
I can't believe Minnie turned out that way.
It was my brother's idea.
Oh, okay. Did you, and Jean, you can answer this too, did you go up on the sand hills and collect grapes and bring them home for preserving?
I took my wife on her first date up at Southern Shores picking wild grapes.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember whether we ate them. I don't think Grandmama got enough to make jelly, because we would eat what we picked.
Yeah,
Hard to find grapes up on the hills today, I can tell you that.
gosh.
How about huckleberries?
Ticks too.
More sure.
No, sure. Okay, and you crabbed. Did you fish any as a kid?
Yes. We fished on the dock, and I always hated to catch those blooming eels. Those things that wrap around your arm, and oh, it was a dread. And my brother, I couldn't dare say anything, because he would just never leave me be. So I had to grit my teeth and bear it and try to get it loose. But I loved the fish, but I hated the eels.
You know, Stanley, I know that you have visited with a lot of people over your lifespan. Tell me about people in the village that you visited with. I know you must have spent a good bit of time at Aunt Doll's.
Oh, Aunt
So
Doll.
tell me about some of the favorite people in Kitty Hawk.
I lived with Aunt Doll at nights for several years growing up, because her children didn't want her to live alone. She was so old. And each child would give me $1 apiece per month. And I was expected to buy my school clothes out of that, and my spending money out of that $1 apiece from her 6 children. So that was a little way to make some money. Then I would go up to Mr. Ivy Dowdy's, and that was always something to be around. He and Vance. Vance was his bachelor son, and they always had some yarns. And Mr. Ivy could tell ghost stories, and he could tell a real good ghost story. And then we'd go to Aunt Ethel Guard's, which was Aunt Bonnie's sister, and she had a crank Victrola, and we would listen to the music. And we would go down to the docks and fish, and in the wintertime, I'd go with some of the older people duck hunting. And I told my mother one time that if I ever left home, I'd swim or fly, because all we ate was fish and ducks.
Now, your mother came from up the beach a ways,
My mother was born in Wash Woods.
Washwoods, but I think that her family actually lived here in Kitty Hawk
No,
at an earlier time.
My mother's family was from Roanoke Island.
Oh, okay.
She was a doe, and my grandfather was a doe, and my grandmother was a bass knight.
Oh, okay, all right.
Now, my father's people all came from Kitty Hawk. As far back as we can trace them, they've been in Kitty Hawk.
Interestingly enough, one of the earliest Beechams was a fellow by the name of Edmund Beecham. And he listed in one of the deeds, his occupation is listed as a cobbler. And that was like in about 1790 or something. And I can't imagine what a cobbler would do in 1790 in Kitty Hawk, but anyway, that's what he was listed as. And of course, the others listed as plantation owners. I've never seen a plantation in Kitty Hawk, but maybe they were here. Jean, tell us about people that you remember well in Kitty Hawk and that you like to spend time with. You told us about Miss B.
Well, Captain Guard, you remember him?
Oh, yeah.
And then-
Mr. Silas Gordon.
Yep. We'd go over there and play Chinese checkers, and then we'd go to Mr. Truxton's, and he would help with crossword puzzles and also play checkers some. And then we would go to Uncle Fonny's and Aunt Norrie's and Granddaddy, and the kids would sit out there. Aunt Norrie and Myrnie would sit in the living room, and he would tell us all stories. And like Stanley said, he could tell ghost stories. He could tell more about that graveyard hill right there. And we wouldn't even walk around it. I mean, we'd bypass. We wouldn't go by there. If we had to go, somebody had to go with us.
Now, Graveyard Hill, just for the benefit of those that drive through Kitty Hawk, is the curve with the oak on it, right?
Devil's
Where it
Oak.
looks like it's Devil Oak. What they call
Right,
it,
on
Devil
Midget
Oak.
Road.
So you
Midget
watch it
Road.
when you go around that curve, folks. There may be a
Oh,
ghost.
you might see
around
somebody jump out.
there. Who else that do you remember well?
Well, on Sundays, everybody visited. After church, they would get in the car, and you'd see one aunt, and then another aunt the next Sunday, and the next Sunday. And so we visited all of those, and everybody on Poor Ridge Road was great. There was plenty of kids down there. And we'd go to Uncle Leon's and have Rita Mae, and all of the kids would be there. Because like Minnie said, there wasn't very many our ages unless they were all related to us.
Yeah.
Well, during the wartime, a lot of people moved
Yeah.
away, and a lot of them went to Norfolk to work, and that took and the others were in the service, and they were stationed around about. I was kind of fortunate in that we were in the kid at Elizabeth City, so we got home on weekends, but a lot of people weren't that lucky, I guess. Who are some people that you remember, Minnie, that you like to remember tonight?
Probably one, Miss Sue Hines used to live up the road from us, she and Willie. And she was always the lady you could go to if you got in trouble, and she paved the way for you to get home. And I remember one time, my sister and I had got these legging winter suits with the leggings and the coat and the cap and all. And Mama had told us to not get wet, stay away from the landing. And we went down with the sled out on the ice, and Tink Scarber came by he had got ice skates for Christmas. So he hooked the rope onto it and pulled us all around, and the sled skid right on out where there was no ice, and we walked about a mile up to Miss Sue's to get baked up so that we could go home. Miss Sue was always help you out, though.
There was a gentleman that I think your dad had something to do, Santos.
We always called him Hap. His name was Manuel Santos.
Yeah, tell us about him.
He came to Norfolk. He came, I don't know exactly where he came from, the Azores, Portugal, somewhere, but he got to California and he got to Norfolk. And my grandfather was the blacksmith for the city of Norfolk, my father's father. And he took him home with him. He owned a farm out in Chesapeake. And he felt, young boy, and he felt sorry for him, and he took him home with him. And when Granddaddy retired, he always lived with them. And when Granddaddy retired, he took the job of being taking care of the hunting lodge at Martin's Point. And it used to be called Cat Cove. It was owned by Mr. Gravely, which was the China American Tobacco Company. And Granddaddy took that after he retired and worked there, and Hap came with them, moved down here with them, and he bought my uncle's house, which the 2 yards almost joined, and he always took his meals at my house, with Mom and Dad, and we grew up with Hap. He was like an uncle to us, and he was a very wise old man. He said, you see somebody, he grinned all the time. Beware, said he a son of a bitch.
And I believe Hap is buried in Dawson Cemetery.
Yes, yes. And when he got very old, and he loved children, absolutely loved children, and he gave Elsie Scarborough some money, and he told her that every child came to his funeral was to get $1. He sure did. And every kid that was there got their dollar. And he was always good when you came in on the bus. You could get off at the store. Every kid in the community, which weren't many of us, got off at the store because Hat was good for a bottle of pop and a candy bar.
Don't we wish there were people like that around today?
Yeah, he was good to the children.
Gene, who do you remember like along those lines? Anybody in particular?
Mr. Tom King,
Mr. Tom King from Duck.
he scraped the roads and he would always, he didn't have much money, but we'd go there and one day we were up there and he said, "What are you going to do today?" And we said, "Well, we want to water ski." And he said, "Well, I know exactly what to do with water, how you can water ski." And he took an old barrel that he had, knocked the top off, took out the water staves and put them on there and put us something to hold our feet on. You ought to try water skiing on a barrel stave. Right over, but whoa, we had fun.
He was a great old guy. He was a tall, slender guy. Didn't look like he had an ounce of fat on his system anywhere. And he drove a big Mack truck. And the wheels on that were about this high, and then he had to throw sand up on top of that. Now, he wasn't so bad, but Jesse Perry also worked with him, and Jesse was a short guy. Now, how Jesse got to throw the sand up all the way up there, I don't know.
But he kept all the roads,
He kept the roads
he'd
so-
scrape so that you could ride right on them.
Mr. Tom was very, very unusual too because his wife died when Cecil was just the baby. And he raised 3 boys on top of working and helping with the community, you know, and so forth. And the boys were nice boys.
I knew something bad about Mr. Tom. He used to come out to the school cafeteria after we got a cafeteria. We took our lunches a little bit, and he would take his false teeth and put on the doorstep. And he'd take his chew of tobacco and lay on top of the teeth. And then he'd go in the cafeteria and eat. Well, the flies were all over the place. And he'd come out of that cafeteria and he'd pay his quarter for his lunch. And he'd pick up that chew and them teeth and go on about his truck.
No comment.
Are y'all going to order dinner now? Well, that's a story I had not heard about. I'm glad to hear that one. Well, some great, great people that have grown up in Kitty Hawk and Duck and Collington and all around. And you know, we've really been blessed to have known some of them over time. You had an uncle, Sam, Steve. Steve Meekins, grew up there with your grandmother. Had a mule. He tended a little farm. I don't know how big it was, about twice the size of this building, I would think, something like that.
Epridge Garden.
And up the ridge, up the road. And I don't, they do that just for the fun of it, or?
No, he just grew well, that's why we have the potato house, because
Oh,
they
okay.
used to put all the potatoes in there, sweet potatoes and Irish potatoes.
And he had a mule, or a horse, or a mule, I guess. He also was a little bit of a carpenter, and he made boats that put on crosses and out on the post and would spin around when the wind was blowing. Now, I remember chewing tobacco because one time I got stung by a wasp or something. I went over there and Mr. Steve gave me a plug of tobacco and stuck on that wherever I got stung, and by golly, it went away. Stanley, any other stories that you want to share with us?
None that would be appropriate.
Well, I'm sure that they would be appropriate.
I'm not.
Let me ask you, you grew up in Kitty Hawk in this area in a time when things have changed a lot. What is it that you miss the most from where it was and to what it is today? Stanley, we'll ask you first.
Well, just the way of life. It was simple. We didn't have a lot of worries. We didn't have the temptations that we see with the young people of this day and time. We would go to bed early, We got up early, we had chores to do, and we were pretty obedient to the parents. We did get in a little trouble. We'd go by Zine Perry's store and lift the gate off of his pasture and turn all of his cows out, and things like that at night. But that was just child play. But
Can't believe you would do that, a Baptist that you were.
I went to the Methodist.
Watch it.
I guess it's all right to be a Methodist to do that.
I went to the Methodist 3 times a month.
All right.
But I do miss the way of life and the tranquil settings that we had. The roads weren't paved for a long time. Even after down where Gene lived, they had a paved road. We didn't for several more years. But we enjoyed the fellowship of the community, and I miss that the most.
Okay, very good. All right. Gene, what do you miss the most?
Well, everything that Stanley said, and then you could go anywhere you wanted to. You could go to your grandmother's house, anybody. Nobody locked the doors. And if you went in, there was always something to eat. You could just sit down and eat it. And if Nancy's mother's house, whoever's house you were to, you could do that. And there was nothing really for us to do bad. We did little mean things, like siphon the gas out of Mr. Carlos's bus so we could get to the movies, but we
a way
didn't
to
have
get
any.
around.
We didn't have any money to get gas, but he had gas.
So you get it, and your dad, remember
That
that
was
old
the worst
truck?
tasting stuff. Yeah, and Daddy's
That
old
old
truck.
truck.
And then we could load everybody in, and everybody would go over, and it didn't
Gene's
cost
dad
much to
had
get
this
to the
old
movies.
truck, and Gene would come to Duck, her and Mary Helen, her sister, and half of the girls in Kitty Hawk would come up to Duck and pick Norm and I up, and we'd
In
take
that
off.
Model A?
Oh, yes.
The
It
back
was-
of it would hold about 20.
Yeah, we would load it down. We were cruising the beach, looking for some boys, but it wasn't any there.
We tried.
Well,
We looked.
you went to Currituck, you found one.
He came by boat.
Okay. All right, what do you miss the most of,
I think what Gina Stanley has said, it's a different way of life now than what it was. It was a simple way of living and a lot of fun. I think the thing I miss the most in Duck is the closeness of everyone that lived there. And everybody there, they hunted, made a living off of hunting and fishing. They all fished in the oceans and in the sounds. And when I was a child, it would get real foggy, and I don't know where it came from or whatever got it, but there was a big old foghorn down on the end of the wharf. And when it get real foggy, the children in the neighborhood had to man the foghorn and crank that old thing till the last person was in. And I would love to have had the foghorn.
in that regard, tell me, do you remember the blackouts that they held in World War II?
I do.
Yes,
Yeah?
very much so.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me about
Yes.
it.
Well, the government came by and they gave you these black pull-down shades, and you had to put them to every window. And when the sun started going down, you had to put your shades down because the German boats were all up and down the coast here. And my father was working in Manteo building PT boats for the government at the time. And he had to paint his headlights and leave just about 2 inches at the bottom of his headlights. And he drove home every night from Manteo with that much light. You had to shine straight down. And we were eating dinner one night, and I wasn't just tiny. And we were eating dinner, and we heard this explosion. And Dad ran out. There was a path that went right behind our house up on the high hill. And Dad went running through there to see what it was, and he came back to the house and got Mom, and we tagged along, my sister and I. And a German boat had sunk a U.S. ship right out behind our house. And the people were in the water swimming and trying to get away, and it was a submarine, and you could see it. They would go around the boat they had sunk, and they were shooting the people in the water. And it just left I maybe was 4 or 5, it left a real impression on me. And then, of course, the neighborhood had to follow the beach up and down looking for dead people, and there's a graveyard up in Duck where a lot of those people are buried. Unknown soldiers were buried during World War II. Probably in Kitty Hawk also, I don't know, but there's a lot of them was
Don't
buried
think
up
so.
there.
I don't know
As
that.
children, when my sister and I used to go and cut the dogwood, break the dogwood browse and go decorate their thing, and I've often wondered, you would find all kinds of sailor hats and all kinds of things on the beach like that, And I often wondered a lot of different times that I wish I knew who they belonged to, that you could notify their people and let them know where they are. It was just, they were buried there, they were found on the beach, and they were buried there, and they marked it with a wooden marker, and that, and it was like, it always just kind of bothered me to think that they had family somewhere.
Well, that's an interesting story. In fact, it's much more personal than any experience I had during that period of time. And Gene, do you have any,
No, I don't remember any of,
Stanley?
I do at Caves Inlet. We had the black curtains on the windows, and of course we had kerosene lamps. That's why we didn't have electricity. And then when we moved to Kitty Hawk, before I started school, Edgar Perry would come through the village with a hand crank siren, and that he'd come through and you had to turn off all your lights. Well, we hung up black curtains, and then he'd come through an hour later with the all clear signal, so we could turn our lights back on. And I usually hid under the bed because I knew there was a German on every corner.
One of the things that locals did, and my grandfather, I remember doing, was every night they turned on the radio to listen to the news to find out what was going on around the world. And I've forgotten now the Gabriel Heater, and
Yeah.
I don't know all the people that did. We're running out of time, but I want to give the audience an opportunity to ask any questions that I didn't ask. So does anybody have a question for any of the panelists here? Yes.
What do you remember about the flat top houses that started being built about 1948 and for the next,
Frank's Dick.
Yeah, those houses.
The ones
Okay,
up in
so the
Southern
question is,
Shore.
what do you remember about those?
Yeah, going up or,
Okay.
Frank's Dick started Southern Shores with a lot of the flat top houses. They were very popular. They're supposed to be wind resistant for the hurricanes, and they were made out of cinder block. And Billy Gray is here somewhere, and his daddy used to make cinder blocks. And I can remember under the old oak tree where they would put them out to dry,
Right.
and that's where they started the flat top houses.
Okay, anybody else has a comment about that? All right. I got one. Are there any other? Yes, okay.
I used to live in the gray house that was behind Bob's Bait and Tackle, and now, I guess that was the old store. When was that gray house built in that store? It's now Bob's Bait
The
and
old,
Tackle.
the old store at Duck and the house that was to the south
Yeah,
of it.
there was a house to the south of it.
That was my aunt, my mother's sister. She married Caroline Rogers. She married Mr. Ned Rogers. And her granddaughter was Sandy Tillett, which was married to Mark Bassnight, that just passed away. And my uncle ran, my mom ran the store. The house was a hunting lodge, and my aunt ran the hunting lodge. And her husband, Mr. Ned, Uncle Ned, he had the fish house down at the landing. And they used to haul fish from there up to Virginia Beach. And the fish truck came once a week and brought ice in when it came and took the fish away. And if you wanted to leave Duck, you could catch the fish truck and go up to Virginia Beach, but you had to stay a week or either walk back.
long walk.
And we had an aunt, a great aunt that lived in East Ocean View, which was a swinging place then, they had the big amusement park,
Yeah.
and it was a place to be. And this aunt was my great uncle's wife, and Aunt Lily was a lady before her time. She drove, and my uncle spoiled her terrible. She drove one of these roadster cars with no top, and she wore the big old hats with the plumes, and all that. And she opened a beauty shop up in East Ocean View. And my sister and I had real long hair, and Mom would braid that hair, and Man, and we got up, she'd let us go up to, send us up on the fish truck, and Aunt Lily would meet us. And Aunt Lily cut her hair and hooked the electric wires to it. And when we came home, we looked like we had an afro. And if Mama could have got hold of Aunt Lily, Mama'd have been serving time till she died.
That was called permanent.
And it didn't wash out either.
No, it did not.
It was there for, till it was a long time. I'll tell you a tale what my mom, I shouldn't tell this, but my mom said the first time she ever saw beer and hot dogs, she and her sister and Eva Gard had mended net and hung net, and they had saved up enough money. They caught the fish truck and went up to Virginia Beach. And said everywhere they went, it was advertising beer by the pitcher and hot dogs. They didn't know what beer and hot dogs were. And they went in, and they were dressed. I mean, the Sears catalog had, they'd sent their money off and got these clothes. And they had the hats, little hats with the veils, and on. They were going to town. And they said the first thing they did, they come in and they ordered, didn't know what they were getting, but they ordered it. Said they set the pitcher of beer on the table, and they got their hot dogs. Mama said the first thing she did, she forgot she had that veil across and shoved that hot dog in a bit of big hole. And said Eva was thirsty, so she poured the beer in the glass and took a drink of that. She said, my God, youngins, it's the bitterest stuff I ever drank in my life. She takes the sugar and starts putting it in and stirring it up. And the beer starts foaming and coming off of the table. And they said they weren't long, they were asked to leave.
We all grew up about the same time. I'm a little younger than most of them up here.
Don't rub it in.
But, it was really a great time to grow up in the Outer Banks and in Kitty Hawk and Duck. And I go through the cemetery and I look at names of people and I remember those people and remember great things about them. And so it's really just great to have that kind of attachment to the community. And I'm sure that each of these people have the same type of attachment to Kitty Hawk or Duck or Collington or wherever they may cabins in, because we were really fortunate to live in a great time with great people, and we're happy to share that with you. We appreciate you coming out, and don't forget the stories of Kitty Hawk. Thanks a lot.